things moments after he was in a perhaps fatal injury.
Well, for Vanessa, not for him.
I'm sorry. He was just in a car accident, am I right?
Yes, correct.
And now you were also aware that he was not stumbling when he was walking around talking to himself.
No, he was not.
He was not slurring.
No. Oh, no.
Now, let's talk about some of the other things you mentioned on direct. Now, before we talk about some of those tests that you gave, I want to step back a moment and talk about when you first saw the car drive by. You were patrolling Canyon Road around the time Mr. Dawson drove by a little bit before 1 a.m.?
Yes, sir.
And when you were patrolling, you saw him drive by your police car going 51 miles an hour, am I right?
54.
54, excuse me. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, that's speeding, isn't it?
That is.
But you also thought that drunk driving might be involved.
No, I did not. Not at that point.
Well, actually, officer, you saw the car swerving a bit.
I believed it was hydroplaning at that point.
Actually, at first you thought that there might have been drunk driving involved, but you ruled that out because of the weather.
Yes, I did.
So after not pulling Mr. Dawson over because you thought the only reason he was swerving was the wet weather, you then came upon the scene after he had crashed.
Yes, unfortunately.
And that's when you decided to do some field sobriety tests.
Correct.
Now, actually, officer, before you did those field sobriety tests, the district attorney of Midlands came upon the scene, am I right?
Yes.
Objection, relevance.
Your Honor, if allowed to further question this officer, the district attorney of Midlands is the mother of Vanessa Sullivan. This goes to combat the state's accusations that the field sobriety tests were failed. If allowed to go into further questioning, I can prove that because the district attorney was there and further statements that were made to my client makes it less likely that the field sobriety tests were accurate and more likely that the events of that night made Danny Dawson less reckless.
Tread carefully, but I'll let it go right now, overruled.
The district attorney came upon the scene, am I right?
That is correct.
The district attorney, well, that's Vanessa's mom.
Yes.
Now, officer, when the district attorney arrived on scene, she had just seen her recently dead daughter feet away, am I right?
Yes.
And in response to seeing her recently deceased daughter, her only daughter, she starts screaming at Mr. Dawson.
And rightfully so.
She starts screaming things like, "I'm going to make your life a living hell."
Yes, that's correct. She did.
Now, on your direct examination, you talked a lot about those tests, the first of which was the ABCs backwards test, am I right?
That is correct.
Now, officer, I want you to do something.
Okay.
Your Honor, may the witness step down?
Sure.
Okay, officer, come down here for me. I want you to stand right here. All right? Now, you'd say when you were asking Mr. Dawson to do his ABCs, you were about this far, am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, do you know your ABCs backwards?
I do.
Okay. Why don't you start with the letter X and go backwards?
X.
Yes, please.
Okay. X, W, V, U, T, S, R, Q, P, O, N,
Excuse me for a
M.
moment.
Your Honor, I'm going to object that he should let the witness finish his answer.
Your Honor, I'm just about to ask another question.
Overruled.
Apologies, officer. Please continue.
Where did I go?
Let's start from Q.
Okay. Q, P, O, N, M, L, K, J, I, H,
Just a moment.
G.
Officer, when I interrupted you, you stopped your ABCs. Am I correct?
Your
You
Honor,
asked-
I'm going to object to relevance. These conditions are completely different from having the defendant, after a car accident, say his ABCs backwards. This officer isn't on trial.
But he's not, but how's it different?
Your Honor, this is completely different conditions. He's not under a field sobriety test himself. Seeing whether or not a police officer can do this is completely different from whether or not the defendant could do it on the night of the accident.
I'm just curious because if the police officer can't do it when he's sober, then obviously no one can do it. I think that's what we're trying to get at, right?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is right in that the circumstances were different. The district attorney was the one screaming, "I'm going to make your life a living hell," to my client. This line of questioning goes to show that just because my client was not able to do his ABCs backwards from start to finish does not mean that he was drunk.
Are you trying to say that the district attorney was yelling at your client while he was doing his ABCs?
No, Your Honor. What this line of questioning goes to show is that a mere interruption of the ABCs can prevent one from doing them continuously. That is all we are doing here.
Okay. I think I'm just going to give it 5 more minutes, but I'll allow it.
Yes, Your Honor. You may take your seat, officer. Thank you. Just a moment ago, officer, I prevented you from continuously doing your ABCs backwards. Am I right?
That is correct.
Well, let's talk about another one of the tests that you administered. You also had Mr. Dawson do a nystagmus test, am I correct?
That is correct.
That is where you hold up a pen light and have them follow that light continuously.
That's correct.
Correct me if I'm wrong, when their eyes twitch, that's when you know they might have been drinking.
If there's a jerking, yes.
Jerk, okay, well. Officer, would a head injury, well actually a head injury would affect their ability to move their eyeballs continuously, am I correct?
It has the potential to.
To the best of your knowledge, Mr. Dawson was not medically examined before you ran these tests.
He was not. However, I asked him if he was all right before I conducted the test.
And you're also familiar with the accounts of the eyewitness?
Which one?
London Bennett.
Yes, I am.
And London Bennett has told us that Mr. Dawson's head was covered in blood after he had experienced this accident.
Okay, yes.
Do you know, officer? I just want to be
Well,
sure.
yes, he had the gash on his head.
So let's move on to now this third test that you ran.
Okay,
You then had Mr. Dawson walk in a straight line, something like this,
just like that.
just to see if he wouldn't fall.
Correct.
However, you administered this test on the soaking wet pavement.
Yes, it had just rained.
It had just rained, officer, and well, Mr. Dawson lost his footing, didn't he?
Yes, he was stumbling.
Correct me if I'm wrong, officer. You also stumbled when you were administering this test.
You're wrong.
You did not lose your balance when you were trying to have Mr. Dawson walk in a straight line.
I slipped.
Excuse me, officer. You slipped when you were trying to have Mr. Dawson not slip. Am I correct?
Not stumble.
Excuse me. Let's move on now to the fourth test that you ran.
Okay.
The fourth test you had Mr. Dawson do was stand up on one leg with his leg out, right?
That is correct.
And count back from 1,000?
Yes.
Once again, officer, you had him do this test on the soaking wet pavement
That is correct.
while the district attorney was still screaming behind Mr. Dawson.
Yes, correct.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
No redirect. May this witness be excused?
Yes.
May the prosecution call